This is Parenting for the Everyday, a podcast dedicated to meeting parents in the trenches of parenthood. We explore how our faith fits into our parenting. With the help of our guests, we are seeking practical tips on how the gospel can speak into our day-to-day parenting. From the easy stuff to the hard stuff, we want to talk about it all.
This is Parenting for the Everyday. I'm Holly Dykandrew.
And I'm Becca Alvarez.
And today we're talking about helping to raise kids with gospel-sighted vision. And so what does it look like for parents of faith to raise kids to see people that look different than them, to interact with them? And today we're focusing mostly on people who have disabilities, ability inclusion, that look and act different than what we are used to seeing. The best way. Again, see, we're starting off rocky, and I think that's good, and I want to own that. And I want to say this is even a topic that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with, sure. And so I want to do it well. And so let's just start with maybe introducing our guests who are in the studio. And so Heather, I'll actually let you go first.
Okay, I'm Heather. I'm the Ability Inclusion Associate at Christ Community Chapel. My job is to help all families and individuals with disabilities to fully integrate into the life of the church. So, where it used to be the special needs program, what we found is that people are like, we're not asking for any special treatment. We just want to be able to do what all the other families do and what the kids do and do the programming and stuff. So we make the accommodations wherever is necessary.
Yeah. And then Lori, will you introduce yourself as a mom and tell us a little bit about your story and how you're here?
I'm Lori Thomas, and I have a son who has cerebral palsy. He's one of 5 of my kids. His name's Will. He'll be 15 next week, which is insane.
Wow, seriously?
So
I would not have
big.
believed that if you'd told me that.
I have to start treating him like he's going to be 15 because, you tend to want to be like, oh my gosh, my baby.
Yes.
I would never talk to my other kids that way. So I have a 16-year-old girl and then 3 boys after Will who are 12 and twins who are 10. And I'm married.
It's a wild ride. It's a wild ride over at your house, isn't it?
It is crazy. Yeah. It's if you think about ability inclusion, I feel like that's like my everyday life because none of my kids are the same. If I just had Will, I would think, oh, this is, I've got to figure out how to make the world happen for him. But I'm doing that for all my kids anyway.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's just one other kid in the family who we've got to figure out what he likes to do, what his interests are, and how can we fit that in to our family schedule and the, day in, day out needs of having a big family. So maybe that's a little different for our family than families who have fewer children.
Yeah.
Heather, you briefly mentioned this, but I kind of want to go back through a little bit. We mentioned special needs and ability inclusion. So why is this conversation even important to be having?
Yeah, that's a good question. So today in America in 2024, 1 out of 36 kids are diagnosed with autism. More than 1 out of 10 boys will be diagnosed with ADHD within their lifetime. And where those sound like big numbers, they've always been among us. We just are becoming more aware of it today. And we need to naturalize relationships with people that are different from us. If we keep looking at things like these are kids made in God's image, we all are, whether we're nonverbal or verbal, walking or not walking. If we're hyperactive or we can sit quietly in class, we're all combined in that way. But the fall affects each of us. It affects us in the same ways, but also in individual ways. And when we look at the foundations of it like that, we can see that the things that make us the same are more great than the things that separate us. And so I think you were saying, I don't even know how to necessarily start this conversation because you're afraid of saying the wrong things or I think that's one of the biggest problems with interacting with people with disabilities is that the fear of offending or doing or saying the wrong things is actually prohibiting relationships from forming rather than just saying life's going to be a little bit messy and this friendship is, and I'm going to put my foot in my mouth sometimes, but you know what? We're going to be friends anyways. And I think everybody would appreciate that, especially other parents with kids with disabilities.
It's so interesting. One of the things that's so important to me is our family is also created through adoption. And I learned when we adopted our kid, some of the comments that were made out of ignorance were really offensive comments. And it wasn't, people didn't even realize, and to this day, they probably don't even realize like what hurtful things or the way that they acted or said as we were forming our family. And so it just made me say, okay, wait, am I that person in a situation? How can I be really cognizant to make sure that I am watching what I say in a way that is exactly what you're saying, celebrating the things that make us the same, that are how we're uniquely created. And then I also just want my kids to be really equipped well to do that and to love people well.
And I think one of the obstacles is that we try not to be in uncomfortable situations.
Yeah.
And I think when we're scared of discomfort, then we avoid it. And then, like you said, Heather, we isolate people. And so if ability inclusion makes you uncomfortable in some way, not in a bad way, but just in some way, then you're more likely to avoid it. And then you're not integrating in the way that that we could, And so I think having conversations like this, getting more comfortable with terms or with friends, just makes everything more inclusive and gives your children more experiences to be around people that are the same and around people that are different. And I think that's beautiful. I think that's the way that things were created to be.
Let's start with some negative things and then move into other things. But what are some terms or interactions that people do that are actually really perceived as negative? What are some things that's like, hey, you should not say this and you should not do this?
Well, I think before we get into like terms or phrases, let's talk about just a mindset even.
Yeah, great.
So sometimes kids that are on the spectrum or something will have problematic behaviors in public, or even kids with ADHD or something. So you see this behavior and you think that kid's being a problem versus that kid is having a problem. And when you change just a little shift in how you're viewing a person, like I got to stop them from screaming in class, or they're doing something they shouldn't on the playground or something, then you go straight into what can I do to help them in this scenario? And then the behavior changes anyways. So instead of thinking, okay, why are they being a problem? You can say, what is the problem they're having? Or like what triggered them? Because all behavior is communication. So once you find out what's dysregulating the kid, then you can change the whole situation. And it just takes a little bit more patience and staying calm and trying to see things from their lens rather than from the outside and trying to just hurry up and fix a problem.
I love that just such a small shift, because that really invites empathy into all situations, so being able to see it from their perspective as opposed to like, how's this going to reflect on me as a teacher, as a fellow mom, as whatever it is. I love that just subtle shift, because then you can see things from a whole different perspective, and how much more beneficial will that be to that child?
What are some of the things that have offended you, or you feel like that was not the way I needed this interaction to go?
Well, the good thing about having a child with special needs, which I don't find it offensive, so we say special needs, but with different abilities, who's verbal, is that he can tell me if something hurts his feelings or he wishes someone wouldn't say, certain things. I think initially when Will was young and we didn't know what life was going to look like, when people would just discount him because his cerebral palsy, he's quadriplegic, so his disability is mainly orthopedic, but it affects his speech, so he can speak, but it's affected. It's like the same fine motor skills you use for your fingers or the fine motor skills for your tongue. So if you can't really like grab a pencil or button your shirt, then your speech will be affected too. So in that way, like when someone doesn't speak clearly, you question how intelligent they are.
Yeah.
And you don't really take the time to listen to them because a lot of people don't have patience when it comes to interacting with someone who's different. They just feel uncomfortable anyway. So they're rushing through the interaction just to be like, I said hi, now I can go. And he's like getting ready to say something and they're already gone. So, I think one of the things that bothered me was people discounting him immediately for the way he looked, being unable to walk or sit up, and the way he talked. One thing that bothers him is when he, sometimes we have to push a stroller around because the world is not accessible everywhere. Even though he has this amazing power chair that he can drive with head controls, and he's got this like
So
amazing
cool.
device that he uses his eyes to write papers on, and he's so bright and so brilliant, and so capable of adapting to whatever he needs to access the world. Sometimes we have to use a stroller, and so people will talk to him like he's a baby. And even like younger kids will be like, "Mom, why is that baby in a stroller?" And he's 10, And the great thing about him is he has such a good sense of humor that, when the people leave, or like say we're on an elevator and they say that and they leave, and then he'll look at me and he'll go, "Goo goo gaga." I was like, "I know, they thought you were a baby. It's pretty." And then we just make a joke about it because like they don't know, the difference between the disability in our family and like ADHD or someone who has autism or, other things, is ours is right out there in front of us. Everybody knows what ours is. So in a way that gives us or people more warning that, this is what we're encountering. Whereas someone whose disabilities aren't as physical, you're expecting them to be typical and fit into a box, and they don't, and you're like surprised by that. You're not expecting Will to go down the slide. He's not going to do that.
Right.
So I don't think that we really get offended necessarily. Sometimes it's frustrating when people don't account for the fact that we can't just go to a playground or, sit in normal places, or like a baseball game. Like we have to get a certain seating. More, it's just the world is not equipped necessarily.
So I would like to add then as to be a friend to you. Like if I was a mom and I was like, "Hey, how can we make this work?" Because I want us to all have relationships like this. The best place to start then would say like, "Hey, let's get together. I have a teenage boy. You have a teenage boy. Where do you guys want to go? Like what's Will's favorite place to hang out?" And sometimes that's at home, And
Right. It's the most comfortable environment for us because we can control
and
what's
it's
happening.
made for him.
It's made
his
for
home.
him, yeah.
And another thing is the activities. Like even though he's a teenage boy and you might see him in a wheelchair or in a stroller, maybe he would really actually love to watch a boy come over and play Minecraft on, and normalizing it.
His
Just
highlights
normalize
are
it.
watching history videos on YouTube, and then, whatever TV show they like, and anything relating to food. So that seems very typical for
is
their
teenage
boys,
boys.
I have a teenage boy.
Yeah.
It's right on par. Yep.
Lori, now that Will is 15, you have had 15 years to kind of grow with his disability and understand what works and what doesn't work. Tell me some about what it was like when he was real young and you had a toddler and a
And 17
child
other
that,
kids, yeah.
Yeah, because Libby's not that much older, right? So you really had a...
Yeah, she was 15 and a half months old when he was born.
Okay, yeah.
And then we waited a while, and he was like almost 3 when Owen was born, and then 20 minutes later the twins were born. So it was 5 and under.
Oh, have mercy. I'm sweating.
I
Lord.
know.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
What are some things during that season that were helpful that people did, things that were not helpful, and things that you needed at that time?
Being pretty independent or wanting to be independent, what was really frustrating to me was not being able to live my life independently with my kids. I always needed help, and I always had to ask for help because, we had a nanny, that pretty much since Owen was born, we've had someone who was regularly at our house, just because, number one, it wasn't safe to have that many kids who couldn't physically get themselves out of the house if they needed to, and I don't have enough arms, It's just really impossible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think what was hard was always having to ask other people to help me live my life. And that was a lot of times discouraging, and I just wanted to do it by myself. What was great was seeing Jesus in the hands and feet of people who showed up to help me, and in unexpected ways and unexpected people. Will's had like 15 surgeries. So always needing help with the kids then, or needing food made, or, bless everyone's folded our underwear who's come over because laundry is never done, and that's like such a practical way to help because, again, I don't have enough hands. So Will's physical. I have to lift him. I have to feed him. I have to change his TV for him, get him in out of his chair. And that all takes time, and time that you don't get to spend doing just typical household chores. You always feel behind. So it's great when people show up and love you so well, and they don't have to. And it's really hard when no one's there and you're like, I really need someone to help me.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, Andrew is so helpful. He has a job.
Right.
Family of 7. Someone's got to work to pay for the circus.
Somebody's got to go to work, yeah.
So, it's like wanting to live my life independently. But honestly, I feel like it's God's reminder, like, you are not self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And this is my way of showing you that you ultimately need me. But I'll show you that by needing other people.
So even, I mean, we were talking even about how we raise our kids, but even as moms and fellow friends and sisters in Christ, it sounds like even just asking and saying, hey, do you need anything? How can I help? Or to your point of like, you want to get out of the house, where do you want to go? It seems like a practical thing that you could do.
Is.
I feel something that's really helpful is rather than saying like, do you need anything? Or if you need anything, let me know.
Right.
Because moms say no.
Always.
Say, can we come over? Can I come to your house and talk? We'll fold laundry while we talk. That's something I always tell my friends, and they love it.
Yeah.
But I just need time to talk with them, and they need their laundry folded. So that works. But being specific or just seeing a need and doing it. If you've got a mom who's got a kid, she's getting into a van and they're resisting and all of her bags are on the ground, just pick them up and put them in the car. And as how that will help your own kids too is you are modeling the behavior you want to see in them. So more than anything, you could like script to write to your kids and say, this is how you treat people with disabilities. Just show them and they will naturally do it too.
Yeah. What are some conversations we could be having with our kids even before we've been exposed or we've interacted with somebody who has a disability? Are there does it make sense that we're reading books with kids that are in wheelchairs and look different? Like, is that a practical thing that we could be doing? Are there shows even that you're like, oh, this character has someone who's in a wheelchair or who acts different? Like, is that something that we should and could be doing?
The opportunity that kids in Will's class have. So he's in 8th grade, going into 9th grade. He was in inclusive preschool, starting at 3. So some of these kids have been with him for 15 years. Yeah. Or wait, no, he's 15. So
like
how do I carry
years,
the one? 12. Yeah. So they've been with him for 12 years. They've had the opportunity for it to be normal. It's not weird that he's in a wheelchair, and it's not like, oh, that kid in a wheelchair. It's like Will, who has a wheelchair. So they know him as a person, and it's just the time that they've taken to be in classes with him and all those things. But initially, when he would go into a new class every year, either I would or a physical therapist would, first or second day be like, we just want to talk about something, about our class, like, this is Will. What do you notice? Oh, he has a wheelchair. Yes, isn't that so cool? This is how he gets around. Like, you use your legs, he uses the wheelchair. See how he can steer it. He needs a little bit more space than you do. Watch out. If you stand in front of him, he's going to run over your toes because he can't stop as soon as you do. And then, Will, is there anything you want to say? And so when people do ask about him or why are you in a wheelchair, because that comes up a lot, and I love it when people ask him, because for him it's who he is. It's part of so much a part of who he is that it's like, it's not shameful, it's not scary. We don't try to hide it. We don't try to be like, don't talk about the wheelchair, because it's there. Yeah. It's 350 pounds. There's no way around it. We thought of a way for him to explain, like, my brain waves don't go all the way down to my feet, so I need the chair to help me move. And I think for any kid, they can be like, oh, yeah, because it, helps your body move. Everybody knows you have a brain. So we gave him words to explain why he's in a wheelchair and explain it to little kids, or usually older kids don't really ask because they get it.
Now, before I worked at the church, I was a house manager for adults with disabilities, and my kids have just always been around it. Mm-hmm. And so I never intentionally had like the disability talk where it's like, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about this and then we're covered. It was just like a natural thing that when it came up, we talked about it. And I don't know if I ever actually like had a talk with my kids before we were in an environment. It was just like, come on, you're going to come with me. And I know like sometimes kids are real curious and they're staring. And if I know the person, I'll say like, do you have a question you want to ask? If it's like somebody in an elevator and it would be an inappropriate time, you can just say like, hey, let's not stare. But, afterwards say, was there something curious about that situation to you? And then we can lead into a conversation. And if some kids or adults may not know what cerebral palsy is or why it is, you can ask the person, or there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know, let's Google it. And then, making it just a natural thing, because it is a natural thing. People are born with disabilities, and we can talk about that.
Yeah. I know that you said that sometimes it's very like individual, but it sounds like at least in Will's situation, like questions are welcomed. Mm-hmm. So, he's not put off by, why are you in a wheelchair? That's not an offensive question. Because
it's not like everybody else. So, maybe he could have like a really cool story. Like, he was in a stunt double accident or I don't know what, but he doesn't make that up. But sometimes he honestly wants to like think of something funny to tell somebody when they ask him why he's in a wheelchair. But to me, it just seems like the part that I don't like about, and I think it's becoming so much better, is that disability in the past equals like something you should be ashamed of.
Right.
Whereas now, people talk about like different abilities. Like it's not disability, it's different abilities. His ability to like listen, we say his bat hearing, like he's so in tune to other things, other skills are sharpened. He's so like, he can absorb, because he can't write. So the way he absorbs information, he can just keep track of everything in his brain because he can't write anything down. So he has like such great abilities in that way. And so I think I want people to ask why he's in a chair, or, how do you do certain things? Because I don't want it ever to be something that he's ashamed of.
I do find that overwhelmingly people are okay with the questions. It's a rare situation where people who know there's a situation going on, are they totally avoiding it? And I think, honestly, that's just like the parent, it might be like a new diagnosis or something, and people are trying to come to terms with it themselves. But once you get past that,
right.
It's like, let's just talk about it, because this is life.
You mentioned kind of sharing with your kids and different resources. And I know I've mentioned this quite a bit on this podcast, but my son's favorite show is Daniel Tiger. And Daniel Tiger has a great episode where they have a character who has braces on her legs, and she uses not a walker, but
like walking sticks.
Yeah, walking sticks. And it's just this really wonderful scene where the kids kids realize it for the first time, and they start to ask questions. And one of the characters, Miss Elena, asks her, if I touch you, will I get that? Like if I play with you, will I have to have braces on my legs? And I really loved that scene, just because then the mom explains everything. She's like, no, this is just how she was born. She can play. She can do all these different things. You can play with her. You can get as close to her as you want. And explaining away any type of fear that could have been in that place. And as my son watches it, I love to see that too, and then be able to talk to him later about something like that. And so if he ever sees something that is different than him, then he already has this kind of foundational knowledge of what happens and how other people are born and how he's born and how they can all interact together. And so there's so much out there that can start those conversations early.
And I've specifically looked on like Amazon for books about kids. They don't have to be the main character, because you're not always the main character in every story, but just kids who are a part of the group who are in a wheelchair or, have braces or glasses or whatever, to make it feel like it's not this like one story of this one kid in a wheelchair, and that's the only book about it. In every book, there's a kid in a wheelchair in some sort of, I don't know, something that helps them move.
Something that I think is really cute about young kids is they'll say like, this is Will. He's my friend with the wheelchair. And it's like you see it, but they're starting to make those connections in their brains. And like, I think sometimes some parents can be like, I can't believe he just said that. But I think the friend in the wheelchair is just like, I'm so glad I'm your little buddy's friend.
And you see all the parts of me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Lori, you've got 4 other kids. and even Heather, you've got kids that you can speak to this. How do we equip our kids to be advocates? So not just like, hey, this is how we interact with someone with a disability, but how do we teach our kids to be champions of them and to be advocates? If they see something, doing something wrong or saying something inappropriate, are there things that we should kind of equip our kids to be able to say and do and know when to do that?
I think the best thing is just having your kids actually like really be friends with people with disabilities and care, and they will naturally champion it for them. Like all my kids are involved in ability inclusion. If my 3-year-old has to be in services for more than one service, I say, do you want to come to mom's class? And she will just go to class with all the kids with disabilities. And it's just very normalized. So when my kids see somebody bullying, because honestly, kids with neurodivergencies and things like that, they get bullied more. And it's kind of like an ugly part that it's like, I wish we were past this point, but we're still not. My kids will get really offended and they will like, I'm not friends with that person anymore. And then I have to explain. I just had this talk with my teenage daughter where I'm like, you know what? We still have to have grace for people. And we can forgive them for saying those hurtful things, but maybe you should just explain why that was inappropriate and an ignorant thing to say.
And I think, too, one of the luxuries of not having a child with special needs is that you don't have to talk to your kid about it. So being intentional about talking to your kids about the different abilities of other people, we don't have, like I say, a luxury. We have that opportunity. I mean, I'm so thankful again for a family, but and before Will, I didn't know anybody who had cerebral palsy or wasn't really friends with anyone. I knew one person, but not my age, not in like the circle of life that I was living in. And so I think back and I'm like, man, I missed out in my whole childhood of never being exposed to that, because when we were in school, people weren't included with especially physical disabilities, because they probably didn't have like an elevator or there wasn't wide enough classroom doors or whatever. And now my kids are living in a world where that's intentional. So I think mirroring that as parents, being intentional about noticing or just bringing it up, because you don't have to. You can be in part of all your sports teams and your things, and you're never going to come across anybody who has a physical disability or maybe is nonverbal or whatever, because it's not, you don't make the choice to enter into that. So I think making the choice to pursue it is something that could be good.
Yeah, and I love what you said even at the beginning, Heather, because I think we're specifically talking about disabilities, but I think this extends to people who are different than us in so many ways. I mean, it could be something as simple as skin color. And so what conversations are we having in our house that is saying like, hey, we're starting with image bearers. Like that's where the conversation starts. Like the differences is not the part that we need to focus on. And so we can be doing that from a really young age.
And I liked your language just then of just enriching, that when you are intentional about seeking out the differences in other people, you really enrich your world and your children's world. And so I think as parents, being so conscious of those efforts and intentions of seeing people for who they are and welcoming that into your children's lives. And if you live that example, your children will follow suit. What's our phrase that we always say? More is caught than taught. And so really being that example and holding yourself accountable for how you treat people that are different is how your kids are really going to end up treating those people as well.
It always comes down to this intentionality factor that we talk to, because even, we can stay in our bubble. We tend to gravitate towards people who look like us and think like us and who are us. And so I think a practical thing is for us to intentionally break that bubble for our kids and be like, no. And does that look like, are we serving in an ability inclusion room? Are we at school saying, hey, we're going to, make sure that everybody has a friend to sit with at lunch, and just all sorts of different ways that we can intentionally look for ways to expose our kids to people who were created differently than we were.
Yeah, I want to speak also too, because we've talked about cerebral palsy and wheelchairs, and the kids in ability inclusion in our class are ones that do better in our enclosed classroom, where they will have much more severe behaviors that prohibit them from going to a typical classroom. But I think there's sometimes the subtle things that create differences between us and other kids where they're high functioning, but they do have that autism or those neurodivergencies where people will look at them and think they don't have a disability. They're just weird, or they're just rude, or they're just inappropriate. And sometimes those kids actually have the hardest time to make friends and find the places they fit, because they don't fit in, they don't identify as having a disability, but then they aren't so-called normal either. And so there's really this gap in society where if you could teach your kids to be friends to all people, it might just be the kid who's in 6th grade and he still cries every day. There's something there that we need to just get past that and be a friend.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's like leading with grace. Yeah, that grace where you're going to assume, that's what you said even in the playground analogy you gave earlier, where you're going to assume that person isn't just weird or a problem. You're going to assume, hey, something else is going on. So how can I be gracious and be kind and loving and a friend? So I love that you said that too. So,
and at the end of the day, everybody has a hard time in different moments of their life. Sometimes those are differing levels of severity, but I know that when I was having my hardest time, it was much easier when people treated me with grace than when they treated me with judgment. So if we can try to emulate that for our kids in all levels, I just think the world would be better.
Guys, we're so thankful that you came and had this, that you were vulnerable with us and had this conversation with us here. And so we're just thankful for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having us and making this an important part of our church and just our society.
Yeah.
Heather, if someone is interested in volunteering for ability inclusion, how would they go about doing that?
You could send me an email at heather.gleason, Gleason, @ccchapel.com. Or you could stop at the Next Steps area. You could come down to the Ability Inclusion Suite, which is right across from the nursery, and come just check it out. Even if we take volunteers of all ages. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with peer support, and we have buddies that go to class with kids in typical classrooms, and there's just a role for everybody.
And if you want to come fold my laundry, you can contact me at my email address.
I love it.
Thank you guys
You're
again
awesome.
for being here. This has been Parenting for the Everyday. Tune in next time.